Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. Nique, great to see you as always.
Same here, my friend. Same
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, we have a very interesting episode this time because we're both going to be speaking to an incredible young man, Gerard Robinson, as well as the report that Gerard, and a very interesting collection of politically diverse scholars wrote on fatherhood. And it's called Good Fathers, Flourishing Kids, The Importance of Fatherhood in Virginia. And so we'll talk a little bit about this report that was done in Virginia, which I think has national implications. But Gerard, welcome to The Invisible Men.
Very good to see both of you, and it's always great when you're 58 years old to be called a young man. So this is already off to a good start.
Well, you're looking good and your ideas are still fresh. So there you go.
Yeah,
So Gerard is the former Secretary of Education in the great state of Virginia, very relevant to the report that we co-authored, and is now a professor at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy at the University of Virginia. He's a colleague. He's a visiting fellow at American Enterprise Institute. So, and he's an honorary Jamaican because he has so many titles. Uh, you know, you have
that's a good
you
one.
have you have many jobs. So
Yeah, hey man. Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but before we get into the report, Gerard, it's always helpful, I think, for our listeners, our viewers, just get a sense of who you are, just where you're from, and something we always like to ask, before you were the Gerard Robinson of today, when you were coming up, when was the first time that race was a thing for you? Like, when was the first time that you realized, wow, that's interesting, that my skin color has relevance in a way that I never really understood before?
Great question. So before Gerard became Professor Robinson, Gerard was a fat, insecure, wannabe NFL player in the 1970s in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles. Both of my parents are transplants from the South. My mother's from Louisiana, as are a number of people who are in LA. My dad grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. And my stepdad, who I actually physically grew up with in my home, was from Marshall, Texas. And so if you read the book about the Black migration, my folks caught Highway 10 and moved to the West. And so I grew up in a gangster neighborhood, and there were three avenues that you had as a way out: sports, athletics, or violence. I wasn't a gangster. I knew gangsters, so that wasn't an option. I was not a great academic student, but I was a really good football player. And to put in perspective how big I was, when I was in the eighth grade, I wore a size 38, 36 waist pants. And
Oof.
so when I was in high school, my buddies who had received Division I scholarships said, Gerard, listen, you don't have to worry about really getting good grades. You just need to be a very good athlete, and schools will find a way of getting you in. And so
Wow.
imagine me in my senior year of high school. I have a 44, chest. I'm just really, really big. And then a 6'3", 270-pound sophomore ran his helmet into my left knee. You hear a crack and an ouch and a cry, and then I'm at the hospital. Long story short, my football career, as I knew it, was over. But what really happened is when I arrived to high school, January 1984, and I give my nun, I'm at a Catholic college prep high school, I give my nun my transcript. She looks at my transcript, looks at me, and she said, Mr. Robinson, what do you want to do? And I said, Sister, I want to go to college. And she said, Really? What month is this? I said, It's January. She said, When is graduation? I said, May. She said, You have a 1.8 GPA. I said, Yes. You've never had algebra? No. Or biology? No. And you got a D in driver's ed and health? I said, Yes. And she said, Well, Mr. Robinson, you made your bed. Now you need to sleep in it. And I said, No disrespect, sister. We've all been in bed for 4 years. You know I have a problem reading and writing, but you passed me every year because my parents paid tuition on time. I was never troublesome, and I was a good football player. And she sat there quietly because it was a social compact. But
Mm.
I'm the one that disrupted the compact. So I ended up enrolling to a community college for 3 years, worked as a box boy at a grocery store, unloaded 18-wheeler trucks, and To my great fortune, two people walked into my life, Elaine Moore, who's still alive, Mr. Raymond Roney, who's not. And they became mentors of mine. And they basically said, your past doesn't have to be your future. So imagine when they told me that I could actually not be a stupid guy, that I can actually go to college. And so when people hear the great things you said about me, and the things that I've done, that's my resume. I said, but you have to put that in context of my revelation. And so that's
Wow.
who Gerard is. And the first time I encountered race, I would say it was 1972. My mother, sister, and I drove, as we did like every summer, from Los Angeles to Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I
Wow.
remember in three different places in Texas and once in Louisiana, we were trying to find a place to sleep because my mom was exhausted. And it was a motel, and there was a sign that said, open, rooms available. And she went to one motel, and she came out just frustrated. She went to another motel, frustrated. She went to the third one, and by this time, she's in the car crying. I said, Mama, what's wrong? She said, they won't give us a room. I said, why not? She said, because we're black. It's 72. I'm 6 years old. I had no idea of what that meant. But to this day, I remember the frustration. So that was 72. My wife was 2 years old at the time, so not that far or long ago.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you. Gerard, you just told me a lot of things I did not know about you.
Yeah. See?
Wow.
And this is why we have the invisible men, because we're often
It's true. It's
very
true. I've known you for
visible.
years, and
Yeah.
I did not know that background.
Yeah.
I'm just
Well,
curious, when you had that experience, gosh, when your football dreams
Hmm.
were shattered,
Yeah.
similar to your knee, what gave you, because it sounds like you met your mentors late a little bit later. What gave you the confidence to pivot in that moment to enroll in community college? Like, what was it that led you to say, I mean, maybe necessity did. I don't know, but what put you on that different path?
Combination of things. That was a guy named Mr. Castillo. He's passed. His son was the quarterback of my football team. His dad was a coach of a lot of guys in LA, some Compton, some of them who went to Division One, some who went pro. And one day I went to his restaurant. It's called Five C's. There were five brothers who were all Castillo. And he said, Gee, what do you think about doing? I said, Coach, you know what? I'm thinking I'm going to go and play at a community college in Pasadena. And he listened to me. He said, Gee, what if your car breaks down? Really practical question. You're stuck between two different cities. He says, why don't you go to a local community college? And I said, Coach, really, I just want to say that I'm away from home, that I'm doing something differently. You want to know why? I got friends who left to go to Berkeley, Stanford, Air Force Academy. I had friends with Division One scholarships to Utah and other places. I wanted to say I went away, even if it meant an hour drive away. And so he says, I hear you, but this is practical. And so that was practical reality one. I then went to the community college close to my home. Number two is walking into a basic English class. When I say basic, I looked around the room, and at the end of the class, I walked up to the professor and said, am I in the right class? He says, why? I said, I'm like the only African American student. In fact, I think like this class, I'm not sure I should be in this class. And he looked at my test scores and he said, well, based upon your test score, you have the English language literacy skills of a first year English language learner. So if you're wondering why you're in this class with other people and you get the context in which I'm saying, yeah, no, this is your class. And so he gave me a book and he says, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to do something. So I go to my car. I'm embarrassed as hell that I'm 18 years old and pretty much in class with people who are learning English. So I flip through the book, my eyes closed. Okay, college boy, what's the first word you're going to learn? So I hit a word and I open up my eyes, and the word I see is genocide, the systematic extermination of a people. And it's like I stopped in time, realized that I had gone through my own fratricide, my own homicide. And for like 20 minutes, I was in a daze. And then when I came out of the daze, I said, you know what? I got to start from scratch. I think third was reading Malcolm X's autobiography and hearing him read the dictionary and go through his own literacy changes. And then it was meeting Mr. Roney and Elaine Moore. That was 84. Met them in 85. And, just people who would walk through my line and give me encouragement. And it was a combination of a lot of things, as well as, getting closer to God and having some reality checks about what I wanted to do with my life.
Brother, I'll tell you, that was one of the finest introductions to a life experience on this show that we've had. And we've had some exceptional ones. The thing that's remarkable when I hear stories like yours is, why can't we do this at scale? What is it about you? Is there something about you that doesn't allow us to scale this incredible transformation? I mean, are you special, or can any young boy with a 1.9 GPA become a professor at one of America's most prestigious universities and become the Secretary of State of one of America's most important states?
I can call my wife in right now, my children, they'll tell you there's nothing special about Gerard. So for Father's Day, maybe they won't say it as harshly. No, it's nothing about me. I'm going to take that M and turn it upside down and say it's about we. It was about two mentors at my community college who saw me and didn't make it a me issue, made it a we issue. There's one person, and if you're listening, Miss Rodriguez, I've been looking for her for 30 years. She's the first counselor I had. It was August 1984. And she's the one that looked at my transcript and my test scores. And she looked up and she went, "And you went to a Catholic school?" She has no idea that if she would have paused for 3 more seconds, I would have got up and walked away because I was embarrassed. Don't embarrass me anymore. But what did she say? She said, "You're here now and we're going to take care of you." She
Wow.
made it a we issue. I don't think there's anything special. There are a number of professors who I've talked to who said, "You know what? Yeah, I was a 2.0. I met one who was a 1.6. It wasn't the GPA as we know, a grade point average. It was about being good, being persistent, and being attentive. That's the GPA. And so while you may not become, and I think the reason that I'm in the field that I'm in is that I'm working in my calling. And I think people who had the same grade point average as they don't have to become a professor because that's not their calling. All of us have a calling. They can just become what he or she wants to be in a different area. But I do think one thing that's different is we've forgotten about the importance of mentorship.
Mm.
Man, mentorship is important. I'm a mentor to several students, young men, women, and others. A couple of guys who are older than me, they want me to be a mentor. That is so important because you need people like Mr. Roney who said, I'm a first generation college student just like you. I grew up in a tough neighborhood just like you. Let's talk. But it also took people like, oh man, I haven't said his name in many years, but he worked for Merrill Lynch. He let me intern with him. He came to my line one day, and I was a business major at the time. And he says, "Well, come and work with me." And so he talked to me about stockbroking and what it would look like, and then people from church. And so, no, not special, but I do think we just need the special moments to take me to we.
Mm. Mm. Outstanding. Well, Gerard, thank you for that. And so maybe all this does tie into the report
Hmm.
that we
Yeah.
just did. So a few months ago, Governor Youngkin reached out to a group of scholars at the American Enterprise Institute, Brookings Institution, uh, the Institute for Family Studies, National Marriage Project, the National Center for Black Family Life at Hampton University, the American Institute for Boys and Men, a very ideologically diverse group of organizations. And believe me, we all don't agree on a lot of things, but the idea was to do a report to assess the state of fatherhood in Virginia. What could we learn? Where are things going well? Where are areas of improvement? And what can be done in Virginia? And as a proxy, what could happen across the country? And so we've produced this report. As I said, it's called Good Fathers, Flourishing Kids. And so, Gerard, we should talk about it. And Nike, I know you've had an opportunity to read the report, so we're happy to get into it. But some of the findings are, 1 in 4 kids in Virginia are growing up without a father. Um, There are high rates of non-marital births. So there is this kind of a divide between single fathers or this concept of engaged fathers. And
Mm.
so we looked at the records of about 1,300 kids from this national survey, the National Survey of Children's Health from 2022 and 2023. And what was interesting, we looked at academic performance, issues in school, mental health issues. And for a lot of the dads listening, there's a term that we use, engaged fatherhood.
Hmm.
Engaged fatherhood, as it relates to the report, were fathers who, there were two things, two characteristics. One is that they self-reported handling the demands of raising children, quote, very well. So they describe themselves as very well handling the demands of raising children. And then second, the family eats meals together at least 4 days a week. So those were the two proxies that indicated engaged fatherhood. And let me just share one statistic, and then Nike, I know you've got questions for both of us. But one really thing that's really interesting is that the impact of fathers, engaged fatherhoods, is significant, especially if you cross that threshold I just described, but differently for boys and for girls. From a mental health perspective, girls who are raised by an engaged father, 1% experience depression. For girls raised by a father who is not engaged, 10 times that number. And that's a phenomena that young women internalize issues. So you see anxiety, self-harm, depression. So very interesting. That's how engaged fathers affected girls. On the boys' side, from a behavioral perspective, less than a quarter, so only about 22% of boys raised by an engaged father had issues like suspensions or bad behavior in school of being raised by engaged fathers. But more than a third, 35% of boys who were raised by disengaged fathers had issues behaviorally. So again, this idea of engaged fatherhood is important, but it affects boys even differently from girls, both beneficially. Um, but in girls, this concept of internalizing issues versus boys who externalize these issues. There's other data we'll share, but I thought that's just one piece of data that I found interesting. I don't know what you guys thought about that.
Well, I was definitely glad to join you on under the leadership of Dr. Brad Wilcox, who's a scholar here at UVA. He's a national social scientist who's doing really good work along with Nicholas Zill and Richard Reeves. And in fact, I did not get a chance to meet Dr. Malone Cologne earlier. But you're right. At a time when partisanship is just so dangerously unhealthy, for people to get together and break bread, metaphorically speaking and academically speaking, to say, good fathers matter, whether you're red, purple, or blue. Good fathers matter, urban, suburban. And so
Yeah.
I was glad to definitely be a part of the project and the work and the stats you mentioned are real interesting. Having worked on the section with criminal justice in part because I work a lot right now with men and women who are in prison, is the fact that if you have a dad who's involved, the likelihood, particularly of boys going to prison, decreases, and same for girls. But there's more stats along with that. But this is glad to be a part of this conversation with both of you.
Yeah, I mean, in reading the report when Ian shared it with me, I mean, it has to be said thank you first to the governor and his team for supporting this financially, and then of course a big thank you to you gentlemen and all the members of the report development. I mean, it's so important, so important. There's so many things that I want to talk about, but one thing that struck me is that there was one woman, Dean Malone Cologne, on the task force. Did she at any point have any pushback from I'll just say a female perspective on the emphasis on fathers or just anything in the report? Did she have a different energy that she brought to the collective?
I don't know your thoughts on that. I don't think so. I mean, she does a lot of work, particularly on the role of the Black family.
Mm.
So her work is not only regarding fatherhood, but I didn't sense pushback. I mean, I think one of the things that we all noticed, which I find interesting, was that the report was focused on fatherhood and this concept of engaged fatherhood, right? And so again, there's lots of data about what's the impact of engaged fatherhood on boys and girls. What she, I think, keyed in on, as well as I, was, well, what is it that leads a man to become an engaged father?
Hmm.
Right, because the obvious question is, if you've got certain kinds of dads where there are deleterious effects on kids, and there are other kinds of dads that are really engaged, they're having dinner at least 4 times a week with their kids, what makes the difference? And there, the report is pretty powerful in showing the motivation to become an engaged father is driven principally by being a married father.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of her research supports that concept as well. That fatherhood, you don't just fall off a turnip truck and suddenly you're a father. Like what happens before that builds the bond and your level of commitment to a child.
And the fact that she's at a center that's housed at an HBCU, Hampton University, added not only academic gravitas, but it puts into context, particularly for Black families, what the idea of family looks like. I think she was helpful. I think one area of not, I don't call it pushback, but just raising questions, it comes from me because when we say fatherhood, I've had a chance to live two different types of fatherhoods, and I don't think my own is the same. My dad and mom weren't married. And so I think I had an engaged dad in my life, even though he wasn't in the home. I had a stepdad who was engaged, but he wasn't married. I'm the father of three daughters. My oldest daughter recently got engaged, and so I now have a great son in law and daughter. But me and her mother weren't married when she was born. I have two daughters now, and I'm married to their mom, and I'm engaged. And so, in some ways, I was an engaged father, even though I was an unmarried man. And so many of the children in the United States, particularly who are Black, and this goes back to the Moynihan report forward, have a number of challenges. So I've lived it. I also understand it academically, but I also know that when we talk about this, there'll be some nuanced ways. And I think the report did a good job of talking about what engaged looks like, but also what does fatherhood look like across research and lived experience.
One thing that was really intriguing to me was the focus on incarcerated fathers. And, it always leads me to the debate of, do you focus resources on the most vulnerable that would require the most work, or do you focus limited resources on those that just need an opportunity, that need mentorship? How do you all think about allocating limited resources to different groups that require a very different set of support?
Great question. So I had a chance to work a great deal on the incarceration piece. So at a high level, you have 1.9 million people that are incarcerated. Although America makes up 4% of the world's population, we make up 16% of the world's incarcerated population. When you look at Black men, the number is better today in 2025 than it was 12 years ago, where you had, 1,000 Black men incarcerated per 100,000, where with the other numbers, it was under 50. What I would say is when I talk to men who are in prison, they tell me two things. Number one, they wish they would have had a stronger, solid education when they were in school. A number of them either dropped out
Yes.
early, completed high school, but like me, it was paper only, or even with the high school diploma, for a host of reasons, there were other literacy skills that had nothing to do with a diploma. So they wanted stronger skills. Number two is they wish they would have had stronger mentorship from people who maybe not were an affinal relation like a dad, but a number of them also talked about following their father's footsteps. If you have a father who's incarcerated, children are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. And for a dad who goes to jail, the chances of his or her son or daughter finding themselves in a situation is much higher than someone who did not. So when I look at limited resources, if I'm to use it in the carceral space, I'm putting it, I'm investing in education, both leading to a certificate or a credential or a license or a college degree. It could be correctional education writ large. That's where I would push it, particularly something leading to a career afterwards. But giving people money in prison, like Pell Grants, has been controversial since it ended in 1994 with the crime bill under Bill Clinton, and it's still controversial today when it was lifted when President Donald Trump in 2019 signed the bill.
It's such a good question, IQ, because I think it is a struggle. Like, I'm someone who runs schools, right? So a lot of my work is focused on how do we prevent these issues in the first place,
Hmm.
right? I've said this oftentimes, not as if a black man is born in prison, right? Like, what happened along the way that could have been affected. So I think it's a very, interesting question. I mean, the report does have a whole section about how to support children of incarcerated fathers and things we can do to turn it around. But we also say, how do we help the rising generation think differently about their own futures, right? So I know you and I have talked a lot, and I think, Gerard, we've even talked about this idea of teaching the success sequence
Hmm.
in schools. And for our listeners, that's data that says if a young person finishes at least a high school degree, then gets a full-time job, and if they have a child, if they got married first, that series of decisions, education, work, marriage, and children, 97% of people who follow that series of decisions avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. So that's a way to think about how to change the game, how to change attitudes um, and behaviors. We even talk in the report about PSA campaigns. I know, Nike, that was something you saw that was interesting, where we actually make advertisements
Hmm.
targeted particularly at young, teen boys and young men by women to say, so that women can share, well, this is what we're looking for in a future husband, a future father, to help acclimate young men to the kinds of things that they should be doing. And then how do we make that possible? Well, how about we have more apprenticeship type programs in high school so that young men in particular can earn credentials, um, do internships so they become more employable and potentially more marriageable. So it is a question of how do you allocate your resources. I'm a big fan in how do we uh, prevent a lot of these issues from occurring in the first place, which is one of the reasons I think schools are such a key part of the equation.
And just to piggyback off what Ian said and the report, when you think about the report itself, I believe it will have a national impact. And one of the things we said is we don't often, like I guess from the book of Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. From this work, we identify Florida and Tennessee as two states who've actually taken a look at fatherhood initiatives and have put in place policy, rules, regulations, and protocols on what the state can do. We're spending millions, really billions of dollars as taxpayers. There are things that we can do before people get into prison to minimize the probability that the children or young adults will find their way into the school to prison pipeline. We have programs where we can partner with nonprofits. So I think this is also a civil society approach. Fatherhood and family is also supported by the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, and others. And so I would say, take a look at what other states are doing. I think we have some internal benefits here in Virginia that can make us actually outpace what's taking place in those two states.
Yeah, I love the fact that y'all didn't just crunch the numbers, produce a number of charts and statistics that it makes everyone either excited or incredibly sad. You also talked about what actions, what tactics can we take in the marketplace to make a difference. And as I was thinking about your tactics, I thought about a similar, I'll call it battle that's going on in society today around. I'll put it the way I would position it: keeping biological males out of girls' sports. And though I view it as an obvious, logical thing that should take place, there is a group of people that feel just as strongly as I do that no, we shouldn't do that. And you both know there are people that will have objections to the report, will have objections to the idea of are you blaming the victim? Are you? And so as I look at the keeping biological males out of sports, what I see is a number of people have had to take hundreds, if not thousands, of arrows. J.K. Rowling has literally every day, I think, post hate mail that she's received on X related to this. How do y'all think about the implications of being honest, being brave, and taking arrows as we push this agenda that's so important to America's future?
Welcome to my reality. It's true. I think one of the things that helps in this report is that this isn't a report solely done by some extreme, right-wing conservative group. We have, again, Brookings Institution, the American Institute for Boys and Men, the National Marriage Project, National Center of Black Family Life. I mean, these are a very divergent group of perspectives. And so hopefully, when people see the findings of the report, they won't immediately be dismissive of some of the conclusions. And again, the conclusions are fathers matter, engaged fathers matter really significantly. And what really drives the creation of engaged fathers? Typically marriage. Now, I'll say though that nuance is very important. And Gerard even said, in his own experience, he grew up not in the ideal situation, right? And clearly has come out on the other side in a very positive. So we always have to acknowledge that even though there might be sort of the perfect situation where a kid grows up, he's born into a married two-parent household, we have to recognize that that's not always the situation. What that's not always the situation that we find ourselves in, and so we have to live in a society where we can help all kids be successful, which is why things like school choice are so important, where regardless of your situation, you as a kid have the ability to choose a great school. And so these things are critical. The thing that I try to emphasize, though, because like give you, for example, one of the pieces of data that's in the report is that when it came to academic outcomes, Black and white kids that were raised in an intact married household, 85% of those kids got A's and B's, and a very small number had behavioral issues in school. On the flip side, Black and white kids raised in non-intact homes had significantly lower levels of academic progress, right? With the implication that family structure is outweighs race when it came to some of these outcomes. So by sharing that data, that's not saying we're blaming single moms or blaming those outcomes, but the data is the data. So it's always important to say that just because a kid is raised in a single parent household with a disengaged father doesn't mean that they're guaranteed a failure, nor does it mean a kid raised in a married two-parent household is guaranteed success. But we can't ignore the vast majority of information. And so when we're talking about these issues, we have to be brave enough to take some of the arrows, because some people want to hear that there's no difference in any of these structures.
Right.
And it's just not true. And if we really want to help kids, we have to be honest.
And when we talk about family structure in 2025, the idea of family has multiple definitions, and the idea of structure has multiple ideas. And so when you take a look at the number of married families that we do in the report, going back to the 1970s compared to now, I mean, it's just spiraling down. And so we're saying those are facts. That's just what data say. Someone is definitely going to say, well, just because I'm not married, or you say I'm a bad mother, I'm a bad father, I can't make it. No, we're not saying that. But this is one of the few reports, and we do have a lot of graphs, but we haven't been there for a reason. That's so you can actually, identify where we received it, but more important, visually, you can see the ups, the downs, and the crossovers. We also have a report that's got great news. If you take Black families, for example, even though the number of children raised in married homes right now, is lower, there's actually an uptick in the number of children who are actually growing up in the kind of homes where we have engaged fathers. So there's actually good news, because often when we talk about particularly our community and family, it's poverty porn.
Mm,
And we just give you all the bad statistics and leave you no hope. And we're saying that there's hope, there's progress, there are recommendations, but we accept the fact that someone's going to say, well, you guys made the numbers say what you want to say.
that's right.
Statistics and damn statistics, as we've heard before. My big takeaway is when people can get together at a table, focus on family and structure, but particularly fatherhood, particularly at a point in American history where there are 2.3 million more women in college than men. That's a fatherhood issue. It's a man issue. When you have Neil Haberstad, who's a colleague of Ian and I's at AEI, he's got a book on the titled "The Idle Army," where there are 8 million men between the ages of 18 and 64 who aren't only unemployed, they're not even looking for a job. 8 million. So some of those are fathers. Some of those will become fathers. And so this is a broader concept of also talking about men in the United States, broader conversation of talking about the role of higher education in fulfilling, middle class expectations. You don't have to go to college to do that. You can also get a job. But we're giving you something to talk about, and we'll live with the arrows because, as we've been told, everybody's got to bear their cross. This is one of
There
them.
you go.
Well, I'll tell you, I am very optimistic just coming out of reading your report and this conversation and the degree of efforts at the state level, committed efforts to deal with this issue. I'm very optimistic. I'm excited. I'm enlivened by the idea of pushing forth policy and actions and tactics to deal with this issue. And as you said, the numbers in Virginia have actually improved. What was it, from 2015 till now?
Yep.
As we get close to wrapping this up, gentlemen, any thoughts on why those numbers have improved? I mean, are there any things you can point to, or what's going on? I mean, I'll just throw out sort of a fun concept that we've certainly seen a shift amongst black men as they lean more into we'll call it the conservative political philosophy. Any correlation there? But what's going on in Virginia?
I mean, I'll just say I find it a very intriguing point. I mean, no one can know for sure, but there is certainly a new alignment occurring, particularly amongst black men who perhaps have just had it, with being promised one set of ideas or one set of outcomes, and it hasn't seemed to occur, at least politically. And maybe there is something shifting in the culture, and this is not just about black. It's across. I mean, across different racial and ethnic demographic
Yeah.
groups, there has been a shift to the right. Some of that's economics, but some of it's more of, maybe a government fueled existence is not the thing that's most important. Give me opportunity. Give me access to high quality education. Give me opportunity, access to apprenticeships and mechanisms where I can live with dignity, and live with agency. I'd like to think that those kind of messages would be the kinds of things that are moving more men and women to want a different, at least political, set of options, if not economic options.
Virginia for the last two governors has been one of the top two states in the nation to do business. And when you take a look at Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, where I am right now, and the southern part, there are almost three different worlds, but in each segment, you have a group of entrepreneurs, a group of business owners, a lot of women owned businesses, many of them African American, who are not only shaping a conversation about economic opportunity, but are talking about it in a way that engages men. That there's a
Wow.
role for you. You're not just a provider, you're actually a human being. I mean, when you think about it, we talk about human being, or we'll say human being as if it's a noun or a subject, when really it's human being. It's the
Right.
action part. And so I think that's taking place at the local level. At the state level, you look in the report, I had a chance to be in Richmond when the governor last summer had a Stand Tall initiative where he put together a multi-agency approach to try to help people in prison, but also outside of prison. And at that meeting were a number of what I call civil society groups who were saying, here's what we're going to do. And so there's a role for there. Let's not forget the role of the faith-based communities,
100%.
churches, and initiatives who are using Jesus to jump over poverty, who are talking about the role of morality, the role of faith in coming around. And so I think that's playing a big part. And in an interesting way, my daughter's in high school, and I have a chance to talk to her and some of her friends, and I work with college students who are a few years older. The number of them who are using non-mainstream media outlets to reach their own conclusions and to get access to information very differently than I did in 1984. First of all, there's no cell phone, but they're getting access to information that before we had to go to college to get, or we had to go to a library. They're looking at stuff. I can't say always making the right decision or the best decision, but they're at least struggling and moving to say, what I'm being told can't be the sole story.
Mhm.
And there are
Mhm.
people who are saying, I actually believe that getting married is important. I actually believe having a family is important. And I actually believe that fathers matter in a season where millions of people say they don't. So I think those things are playing itself out in Virginia and playing a role in what we see.
Beautiful.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Gerard and Nike, I think we have done this report proud.
Yeah.
Please, if you get a copy, again, you can get a copy. It's called Good Fathers, Flourishing Kids: The Importance of Fatherhood in Virginia. And you could find it on the website of the American Enterprise Institute. You can find it on the National Marriage Project website. You can find it on the Institute for Family Studies. There are going to be several op-eds written about the report. So there's good information in there. And I think hopefully not only is it good for the state of Virginia, it's good for the entire country. So with that, any parting comments, Gerard, before you
Well,
like?
yeah, I'd like to thank both of you for not only having me on the show, but having a platform where we can have straight talk. A lot of platforms you can't. That's number one. Number two, making the invisible visible. And then number three, the role that you've played in bringing entrepreneurship into the K-12 education space and doing it with smart business practices, dignity, but also just tough-minded. Yeah, I hear you, but this is where we're going to go. I want
Yes.
to appreciate your voice in that work because you and I have been involved in what some call parental choice, school choice for a number of decades, and now we're seeing the fruits start to mature in interesting ways. So just wanted to give you a shout out, and now have a new colleague as well. So thank you for your time, and happy Father's Day to all of those who are going to listen to this.
Yes, and Gerard, right back at you, because you've sat in the chair as a leader, whether it be, Secretary of Education of Virginia or other leadership roles, where we do take the arrows, and sometimes we're standing up for what we believe is common sense,
Right.
and the courage to tell the truth if we really care about our people. And so, very much thank you to you and to all of our listeners. Thank you again for listening to another great episode of The Invisible Men. If you'd like to listen to other episodes, you can go to www.invisible.men, and we're wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple. But thank you very much, Gerard, Nique, onward.
Onward.